Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another episode of the RW podcast. I've kind of taken a couple month break and I'm ready to get back into it with a regular on the podcast. We have Hopeful Ballistics with us. It's always great to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And today's topic was kind of brought up to me by some recent videos I've done where I'm talking about good hunting bullets or minimum cartridges for certain animals like elk. And I've had more and more people tell me, hey, have you heard of the forum that talks about how people are using a 223 Remington to hunt not only deer, which I think in certain circumstances is okay, but what kind of worries me is people are trying to hunt them with elk, moose, and bear. So that's going to be our discussion today. And I'm real excited to have Hopeful Ballistics because he doesn't always agree with what are my takes. And so it's kind of fun to have a different perspective on things. Here's my first question for you, Hopeful Ballistics.
Okay.
When you hear someone's trying to hunt elk, moose, and bear, what is the first thought that comes to mind for you?
With a 223,
Yep.
yeah, I think it's a bad idea. So hunting, like most things in life, is about percentages. Any lure is going to catch fish. Any rifle cartridge potentially can kill the animal that you're wanting to kill, but your percentages could be much, much lower. So the percentage or the odds of you successfully making that perfect shot on a moose with a 223 versus a 300 Win Mag is much lower. So can it be done? Of course it can. It has. But why would you want to go for something that your percentage of success was much lower? So for ethical reasons, I would want to go with a much higher percentage and a cartridge that was more ideally suited for the task.
Agree. So my first thought is I'm sure everyone's familiar with like the Ryan Reynolds meme of, but why? Right. So that's kind of my like, why? Like, sure, it could do it with the perfect shot placement, but as you said, you have to make that perfect shot placement.
It
Yeah.
makes me wonder if a lot of people just have AR-15s and 223 and they just want to use that. And so it's more of a convenience thing. It's what they have, which I understand if your family's starving or something and you've got to get some meat and that's all you have. But
It-
why? I just think
yeah.
people have ARs and they want to use, but there are other cartridges in an AR, so I still don't quite get it.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about why people would do it, other than for bragging rights of like, hey, I just did something that no one says should be done, but it is possible, other than just for, going and kicking against the grain kind of a thing of like, ha, I proved you wrong, it can be done. What benefits, what else do you think would benefit from using a 223 other than like, hey, I can take my AR-15 hunting? I don't know.
If it was a matter of recoil, surely you could bump up to something like a 25-06 or a 270. I'm not saying that would be the ideal either for something like a bear or a moose, but it would be much better suited. So to go to that extreme of a 223, I really don't understand it. It's like you could kill an animal with a bow at 100 yards, but your odds and your percentage is so low. Why would you try?
Yeah. All right, let's talk about bullet construction because I've read a few of the forums, and the one I read the most, this dude was trying to load up a 77 grain Sierra tipped match king. I feel like that is, if you're gonna do this, that's probably one of the worst bullets
Yeah,
because you're gonna want penetration, and a standard old cup and core match bullet is probably gonna have the least amount of penetration. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. So
So
I know people here in Missouri that use 223 for whitetail deer, and they generally use a Barnes bullet. It's usually a monolithic bullet, probably in that same weight class. And it works fine as long as the shot is good. There is really no issues. Once again, it is a lower percentage. You could do better, in my opinion, but it is fine. And they have had a lot of success.
yeah.
But you're talking much bigger animal and you're talking much worse bullet construction. So I don't understand that.
Yeah. let's talk velocity too. I was just looking through a reloading book, and the reloading books usually aren't the velocity numbers from an AR-15. They're velocity
Right.
numbers from like a bolt action with probably a 20 or at least a 22-inch barrel. And you're saying tops of velocity with a 75 grain bullet would be 2,900 feet per second. So maybe with an AR-15, you're looking at probably 2,800, hopeful, right? So
Probably.
let's just look at the energy. So I did a little bit of math with this. So a 77 grain Sierra tip Match King going 2,900 feet per second. Your muzzle energy is 1,438 foot-pounds at the muzzle. Now, energy is not the end-all be-all metric on killing power, right? It's just one way to measure how much power you have. And I get it, shot placement is king. But when at point blank, you don't even have 1,500 foot-pounds, that's, I don't know about that.
Energy, like you said, is a metric. So it in itself doesn't mean a whole lot, but it's based on muzzle velocity, bullet weight, and then eventually ballistic coefficient based on the distance. And so it takes all those things into account and gives you a good number, a good metric. And so it can somewhat predict good expansion and penetration. So I think it's a real good thing to look at when you're thinking about whether a particular bullet is ethical.
Yeah. But let me just tell you the numbers though, as you get past, well, your normal hunting distance out to 400 yards. At 100 yards, you're down to 1197 foot-pounds, so basically 1,200 foot-pounds. So that's good for deer. 200 yards, you're below 1,000 foot-pounds. 300 yards, you're at 800 foot-pounds, and then 400 yards, I don't know why you would shoot a moose or an elk with a 223 at 400, but it's 650 foot-pounds. It's not a lot. And
It's
that's,
that arrow at 100 yards.
yeah.
You're lobbing it in there, hoping it's going to do something.
Right. One thing that we haven't talked about yet that I really want to mention is in a lot of states, it's not even legal to hunt with a 223 Remington or 5.56 NATO. So your state, I think I made a list.
Yeah.
I think you're good. So is my state. There's no restrictions in my state. And the person that posted on the forum, it sounded like he was in Idaho, so there's no restrictions there. My state, it just has to be a center fire rifle, so it can't be rim fired.
I believe it has to be a 20 caliber center fire here in Missouri.
Okay. Yep. So let's talk about states where it wouldn't be legal. This is a big one that I was surprised by. Colorado. Colorado's got some crazy good hunting, and you have to have a 6 millimeter to hunt or bigger to hunt big game. Some of these aren't going to be a surprise. Connecticut, yeah. Iowa, nope. Minnesota, Washington also requires a 6 millimeter. Kentucky doesn't have a restriction unless you're hunting elk. And guess what cartridge they pick for elk is minimum? This surprised me. Take a wild guess.
25?
Nope, 270 Winchester.
Okay.
Which that's kind of my minimum. I kind of just want to show you. So here's the beloved, 5.56 or 223. This is the 270 Winchester. Why is it so blurry? Sorry. There's a big difference in that case. Plus, you're shooting bullets that are going to be at least double the weight, ideally, in a 270. Shooting 140, 150 for elk. So that kind of makes sense. Also, Indiana. There's a lot of other states, though, that don't even allow you to have bottleneck cartridges, but I didn't name those. So there is some questions on whether you could even hunt in your state legally with it.
Right. Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of laws restricting hunters, but obviously it can be done. People like Kermo Jobel killed over 1,000 elephants with a 275 Rigby, which is basically a 7.57 Mauser. Can it be done? Yes. There's probably a good reason why these laws were put in place. It's probably because they saw a lot of injured animals that were not tracked down or whatever the case.
Right.
So there's probably a good reason.
Okay, so here's my last question for you. I think we both kind of agree the 223 Remington is way too small for elk, moose, and especially bear. Can you
Yeah,
imagine like me as Alaskan Ballistics has been trying to get me to come up to Alaska and hunt bear with him. Can you imagine say, hey, Chuck, I'm coming up, but I'm bringing my 223 Remington. You just kind of, you serious? No. So, um, what is the biggest big game you would hunt with a 223 Remington or 5.56?
probably a mule deer, but don't want to do that. I would go with something else. But I mean, if I felt like that's the only choice I had, I think it's at the absolute outer limits. But I still don't think it's the right call. But I wouldn't go anything bigger than a deer for sure.
Okay. I would even be more selective on my deer. I would say anything bigger than a whitetail, I wouldn't. So even for mule deer, even though it's legal in my state, I wouldn't do it. So I think for whitetail and certain distances, like even in Texas, like most of your shots are probably within 100 yards. 223 Remington's totally fine, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing is distance, and the further out there, the worse of an idea it is to use a 223.
Here's one last thing is people don't really think about is what your bullet's going to do in the wind. So sure, you're a really
True.
good shot, but do you realize like how that bullet's going to be affected by the wind? I was shooting at 1,000 yards, trying to with a 257 Weatherby, where it's super fast. I was shooting a 92 grain bullet, getting almost up to 3,900 feet per second, and there was probably a 10-mile-per-hour wind, and I wasn't getting anywhere close to hitting at 1,000. It was just the BC is terrible on that stubby 92 grain bullet, and so yeah, even funny enough, those 70-ish grain bullets in a 223 are probably around the same BC as that 257 was with that 92 grain bullet. So it's not good, what I'm trying to say. So I would definitely not try to shoot big game past like, I don't know, 100 yards with deer in a 223 Remington. But that's my opinion. Um, Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean maybe somebody if they're using an AR wants it for the semi-automatic purposes, but there's still better options. And I honestly, if I was going after bear, I'd rather have a 10 millimeter pistol than a 223. So I don't see any way to go about it that would be ethical or logical.
Yeah. And you can get ARs in 300 Win Mag. So if you want a
Yeah.
semi-auto,
An AR-10 would be better than an
oh yeah,
AR-15 with a 3.
yeah, 308 would be much better. Still not ideal, especially for
No,
crosshair. Thanks so much, Hopeful Ballistics. It was fun to talk, and let us know in the comments, guys. What's the biggest animal you would take or attempt to take with a 223 Remington?